mysterious story.
Number 6. Extra-physical therapy. Carlo Castellanos Ferrier worked as a parking attendant at a hospital in Washington, D.C. One day, he met by chance such a good-looking girl named Michelle Fredenberg Onion, with whom he later described falling quote-unquote madly in love. While many long-drawn relationships could have been understood as beginning in a similar love-at-first-sight manner, Carlo's version of madly in love gets far more anxious when you think about it. Was what he told a judge while on trial for burglary and stalking charges. Carlo, on the other hand, couldn't take his gaze away from Michelle after that. It seemed that he had to have her, and he had to tell her. Michelle, unluckily, did not respond to his advances. Rather than running into his arms, she went to his managers and said to them not to allow Carlo to come near her any longer. He was given the sack right away because she was the director of physical therapy. However, Carlo had an idea that she wanted to make it difficult for him to get. He was certain that she secretly desired him, whether she realized it or not, and that they were fated to be together. And that's the reason that he devised a strategy. Carlo used to be left alone with Michelle's keys every day when her car was parked before she gave him the sack. And this is the way he had copied her house key, out of love, and also the way he lovingly leave himself into her apartment for a pleasure date night at home. He found her address on the car registration. Maybe he wanted to have their first date that is extra special, therefore, he must have let himself in 2 days early to have himself much time to get everything set for the big night. He installed a camera in her room that pointed directly at her bed because he would not like to forget their big moment together forever. He could record their important date and watch it over and over again this way. After that, he crept beneath the bed and looked forward to her. Carlo's date did not take place exactly as planned. Michelle was accompanied by her boyfriend, who discovered something that is moving around on the floor early in the morning. Carlo was discovered under the bed by him. After that, he used a flashlight to beat him until the police got here. Michelle's situation would not have turned out well unless her boyfriend had come to her aid. There is Carlo's box of condoms and power cord under her bed with him. Number 5. Watched from the floor vents. A woman in Massachusetts has required some minor repairs to her trailer home since 2012. Even though the trailer's previous owner, a 47-year-old man named Christian Hobbs, was a handyman who was happy to assist, only after carrying out a few personal adjustments of his own. The woman did not realize that these changes were not for her or her toddler son's profit, but for his own sick and sinister self-gratification. As soon as the repairs were finished, the woman, whose name has been kept secret by news outlets for privacy reasons, listened to a blaring noise coming from her bathroom floor vent. It seemed that it could have been an animal to her. She knelt on the floor, worried, and looked inside the vent. There was a human face that was staring back at her. "It's just me, I say. Don't be afraid," a familiar voice advised. The handyman's name was Christian Hobbs. Hobbs had kept occupied. First, he had installed baby monitors throughout the house so that he could listen to everything the family did at any time of day. A hole was then cut under the trailer by him. After that, he climbed inside, then another hole was cut inside the trailer, this time through the bathroom floor vent, and he then climbed inside. He hid under the trailer for 2 days straight, bringing an assortment of energy bars, beverages, and tissues with him, while watching and recording the woman and her toddler son both using the restroom with his cell phone. In sum, 16 minutes of voyeuristic video was recovered by the police. Hobbs was sentenced to 3 to 6 years in state prison by a Salem, Massachusetts judge, who stated that she would have given him more time if it had been legally possible. Unluckily, she said, the most serious law Hobbs violated, an invasion of privacy, was only minor wrongdoing. Number 4. The Slender Man. It seems that Theodore Edward Coneys, like many other Americans emerging from the Great Depression, confronted a difficult life of extreme poverty in 1941. This impecunious hopelessness drove him to seek assistance from an old friend named Philip Peters in Denver, Colorado. Coneys was much younger than Peters, and he had amassed quite a fortune in his golden years. Even though Coneys had had the intention of asking for money, when he arrived, he discovered that the door was unlocked. Because no one was there, he went inside and made himself at home, for months. Philip Peters was in the hospital visiting his elderly wife. To give you an idea of how old they were, she had recently broken her hip. Coneys seemed to decide in his mind when Philip Peters came back. Instead of asking for money and maybe being rejected, he would live in the old man's house without his knowledge. conies were very skinny, with gangly arms and long, spindly fingers. He took advantage of his tiny stature by managing to get into the attic through a door that no normal-sized person could fit through. Conies quickly established a routine of waiting until Peters went out of the house before going down to have a meal and look after his hygienic needs before the old man returned. Because Peters was 73 years old at the time, little did he know what was taking place. Despite the fact that it wasn't the greatest plan in the world, it had gotten the job done so far. Until one day. To cook himself some food, Conies went out of his attic abode as usual. Even though he assumed Peters had gone out of there for the day, the old man was actually napping, and Peters was too shocked to find his longtime friend assisting himself in the kitchen. The conversation that ensued is not entirely clear. Perhaps Conies initially told the truth that has been keeping secret and said sorry, or even began asking for money. In any case, Conies finally made up his mind to brutally murder his friend by shooting him with a pistol. One can only think what was experiencing Peters' mind when he was repeatedly struck in his own kitchen by his friend. Was he pleading for his life? In between blows, was his friend asked why he was doing this? Following the murder, police were perplexed. It didn't seem to have any meaning. Because all of the doors and windows were locked, how did the murderer get out of the house? Conies seemed to lay cramped up in his attic quarters directly above them when the police went on conducting an investigation into the crime scene. Because no one could be the correct size for through the tiny attic door, the police left by accident him alone. When Peter's widowed wife returned to the house, she and her son continued to listen to weird noises. They thought they had turned off the lights, but it mysteriously came back on. The house seemed to be intelligibly spooked in their minds. In reality, the workers were always scared and gave up so they couldn't keep a housekeeper. Peter's bereaved ex-wife eventually moved out, and Conies was able to reclaim ownership of the property. Neighbors, like the widow, became ambiguous after hearing noises coming from the house late at night and seeing lights appear to turn on by themselves. According to their understanding, the house was clearly spooked by Philip Peters' ghost, or perhaps by the ghost who had murdered him. Police had a nagging doubt about the case and refused to give up. They eventually got their break one night, about 9 months after the heinous murder. During routine surveillance, they noticed someone peering from at the back of the curtains at the old Peters' house. When the police stormed into the abandoned house, they discovered Conies' tiny frame that was rushing into his attic hideaway. It seemed to be not early enough for him to flee. He was apprehended and dubbed the Spider-Man of Denver because of his spidery fingers and the way he got away from police in his lair. In 1967, the prisoner passed away in the same manner in which he had lived, alone and in cramped quarters. Number 3. Tracy checks again in South Carolina. A 41-year-old woman identified only as Tracy to news reporters gave an explanation that she was the victim of an evil-intentioned stalker who had committed a breach of her privacy and made her fear for her life. Tracy had the impression that someone was following her all the time in her tiny house, especially at night. She was frequently disturbed by weird noises coming from upstairs. Frightened at times, she frequently summoned her sons to examine the attic upstairs. They could not come up with anything. They jested after a while that she was suffering from the mental condition of paranoia or going decrepit, and they dismissed it as some sort of stray animal from the woods. Tracy was struggling to sleep one night when she heard a loud thumping coming from the attic. This was no ordinary animal. The thumping became so loud that the nails began to protrude from her bedroom ceiling one by one. Rather than calling her sons, she summoned her nephew to the house and ordered him to conduct a thorough search of the upstairs that no one had ever done before. Firstly, it appeared that only the two of them were in the attic. Her nephew went on foot little by little to the far end of the attic. He wanted to investigate a completely darkened area where the light bulb had long since burned out. The floorboards beneath his feet squeaked. When he arrived, Tracy's ex-boyfriend was staring back at him, huddled in a makeshift bed made of coats. The ex-boyfriend smiled menacingly. Despite the fact that he and Tracy did not date 12 years ago, he had always remembered her. In reality, he had just been released from jail for stealing Tracy's car. He had crept into the attic after being released to follow and hear her every move. There is not any obvious explanation. He noiselessly went out of the house, still smiling. Despite the fact that the police were unable to make out how long he was in the attic, according to a lot of cups from a nearby Sonic fast food restaurant that was discovered filled to the brim with urine and excrement, he must have been there for a while. Police could not discover him when he made his grinning exit. Number 2. On Jenny's Block in the year 2000, Jennifer Lopez was the main actor in a movie called The Cell, where she literally goes inside the subconscious mind of an insane psychopath to look for answers. Lopez did not know that 13 years later she would get drawn into a similarly crazed person, only this time it would be in real life. He is John Dubus, and he worked as an ex-firefighter in Rhode Island who had been received a disability pension due to a crippling injury that had rendered him unable to find work. Because the cause of the accident has not been revealed to the public, based on his social media history, you can start to have a suspicion that a serious head injury was involved. Dubus started openly prey on his mind about Jennifer Lopez on his Facebook account shortly after he became disabled. He set about posting what he called Jenny art under the screen name David A. Lopez. Despite the fact that he normally notched his initials and hers into a tree, other times it was contingent graffiti throughout the city that he felt specifically related to his imperishable love and affection for Jennifer Lopez. It seems that other Facebook posts consisted of requests for his dear wife Jenny to move in with him. However, the majority of them were just semi-incoherent thoughts, the weirdest of which was a photo of Dubus hostilely biting a box of chocolates with the caption, "Jenny always sending me love." It's not easy to see whether he actually was convinced that he was in a relationship with Jenny. However, it is believed that he was too delusional to hallucinate an imaginary world in which he was being sent gifts by her. In August, Dubus became exhausted with fantasies and craved the real thing, to meet Jennifer Lopez in person. To carry about this, it seemed he went to Southampton, New York by his car and entered her $10 million private estate's pool house. Despite the fact that his car was parked in front, none of Lopez's roving security guards discovered him for 6 days when he walked around her property and performed some truly bizarre acts. As a nice gesture, he once helped her to clean up a pathway. In addition, he enjoyed himself in her front yard on a regular basis. When the police questioned him later, he gave an explanation in a relaxed way that because he believed Lopez needed him to quote-unquote spread my seed all over the world, he did this. He documented his achievements on Facebook the whole time he gave chase to Jenny, first posting a receipt from a nearby clothing store to show to be true that he stayed at Southampton, and after that, taking a photo from the pool house to demonstrate how close he was to Jennifer Lopez's actual home. Who has an idea what else he might have done unless he had been apprehended within a week of breaking in? Unluckily, Jennifer Lopez's encounters with the man are far from over. He made contact with Lopez's mother and made as if to be her son shortly after his release. And this made him be in jail once more. Number 1. The Locked Door. It seemed that Brett Muglin and Mark Hartman were both in their 4th year at Ohio State University when they made up their mind to share a room for the semester. Despite the fact that they moved into the house which was gloomy and moldy, and the power went out all the time, the house's price was low, and the place was shared by 10 other students, the majority of whom were female, so they didn't keep an eye on too much. Brett appeared to go downstairs by himself into the basement to reset the circuit breaker one night after they cut off the power yet one more time. He believed that he listened to some movement nearby while he was down there. He believed that it couldn't have been anything. Finally, there seemed to be just a useful closet door that was always locked down there. He had no idea that things were about to get even stranger. In reality, a weird series of events would soon creep Brett and the other tenants out. Except for the incomprehensible noises emerging from the basement, the drawers and oven in the kitchen that they all shared were continuously left open, and they always turned on the lights when there is not anyone around. The roommates didn't seem to explain, so they started to suspect that the house was haunted. Finally, the house was very big, moldy and gruesome, and it is ideal for a ghost to stalk around in. When Brett went down into the basement to switch the power back on, he was startled by a stranger. Despite the fact that the man claimed to be an Ohio State student named Jeremy who had been living in the house for some time, when Brett asked him further, the man simply walked upstairs and went out of his house. Brett and Mark, alarmed, made up their mind to investigate what was at the back of the locked door once and for all. It appeared that the landlord and the police together arrived at the property, and they all worked together to pry the lock off the door. What they saw next took them by surprise. Even though the utility closet does not have according to what they had thought, instead a completely furnished room with a mattress and a private toilet was discovered. The intruder had sneaked into the basement through a back door that there is not anyone seeing. In the room, there were personal photos of Jeremy posing with what seemed to be friends and family. The lock was changed by the landlord and the students attempted to resume their normal lives. For the time being, the man called Jeremy is still on the loose. Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe because I upload a new video every day. Or if you're still not convinced, here are some of my other videos that I think you'd like. Enjoy.